The morning mist clung to the glass towers of downtown Seattle as Jonathan Hayes stepped out of his black Tesla onto the marble steps of Meridian Plaza. At 52, he moved with the calculated precision of a man who had learned early that every decision mattered, every moment counted. His charcoal Tom Ford suit was immaculate. His Italian leather shoes clicked confidently against the polished floor of the lobby, and his steel-gray eyes held the sharp focus that had turned a college dorm room idea into Hayes Technologies, a company now valued at $1.4 billion. The elevator's ascent to the 45th floor took 90 seconds. Jonathan had timed it thousands of times, part of a morning routine so precise it could set atomic clocks. As the CEO of one of America's fastest-growing tech companies, his schedule was planned down to the minute. Board meetings, investor calls, product launches, acquisition negotiations. His calendar was a symphony of success that played from dawn until well past midnight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But success, Jonathan had learned, was a beautiful prison. His office occupied the entire northeast corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. The space was a monument to achievement, walls lined with patents bearing his name, framed covers of Fortune and Forbes magazines featuring his face, and a collection of industry awards that would make any entrepreneur weep with envy. His desk, a massive piece of reclaimed redwood, commanded the room like an altar to ambition. Yet for all its grandeur, the office felt hollow. No family photos adorned the shelves, except for one. A single faded image sat in a simple silver frame on his desk, two children at a county fair, cotton candy staining their faces, pure joy captured in their gap-toothed grins. Jonathan at 12, gangly and protective, with his arm around 8-year-old Sarah, who was missing her two front teeth and radiating the kind of innocent happiness that existed only in childhood. The photograph was 40 years old. It was the last picture ever taken of the Hayes family together, the night that changed everything. December 15th, 1983. Jonathan could recite every detail of that night as if it had happened yesterday. The drunk driver who ran the red light, the screech of brakes, the sound of metal crushing metal. His parents, David and Linda Hayes, died instantly. Jonathan survived with a broken arm and 3 cracked ribs. Sarah escaped with only bruises. But neither child understood then that the real damage would come later. The foster care system, overwhelmed and underfunded, had promised to keep the siblings together. For 6 months, they'd clung to each other in their first placement, a kind but elderly couple who did their best, but were too frail to handle 2 traumatized children. When Sarah began having nightmares and Jonathan started getting into fights at school, the state decided they needed specialized care. Just temporarily, the social worker had promised. Until we find a family who can take both of you. That was the last lie Jonathan would ever believe from an adult. Sarah was placed with a family in Spokane. Jonathan was sent to a group home. In Tacoma, they were allowed to write letters, supervised phone calls once a week. But 3 months later, Sarah's foster family moved without notice. The state claimed they had no forwarding address. The case file was lost. Sarah Hayes simply vanished from the system as if she had never existed. Jonathan spent his teenage years in and out of foster homes, aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but a GED, $200, and an obsession that would define the rest of his life: finding his sister. He worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, then transferred to the University of Washington on a partial scholarship. Every spare dollar went to private investigators. Every free moment was spent searching missing persons databases, haunting internet forums for adoptees and foster children, following false leads that led nowhere. The technology company he founded at 25 wasn't just about innovation, it was about connection. Every algorithm he designed, every social platform he developed, carried the secret hope that somehow, through the digital web he was weaving, Sarah might find her way back to him. Now, standing at his window as he did every morning at exactly 8:47 a.m., Jonathan gazed down at the ant-like figures moving along the sidewalks below. It had become an unconscious habit, this daily scan of faces he couldn't possibly distinguish from 45 floors up. Rational thought told him it was pointless. But hope, he'd learn, wasn't rational. His assistant knocked and entered with his morning briefing. "The Chun acquisition papers are ready for your signature. Mr. Hayes, the board meeting is at 10, and you have lunch with the Microsoft executives at 1. Thank you, Patricia." His voice carried the weight of a man who had everything except what mattered most. Patricia paused at the door. She'd worked for Jonathan for 8 years and had learned to read the subtle signs of his deepest moods. "Sir, are you all right?" Jonathan turned from the window, straightening his tie with practiced efficiency. Of course, just another day changing the world. But as Patricia left and closed the door behind her, Jonathan's eyes drifted back to the window. Somewhere out there, in a city of nearly 3 million people, a homeless veteran named Sarah was waking up in a sleeping bag under the Aurora Bridge, unaware that her billionaire brother was looking down from his tower in the sky, still searching for the little girl who used to steal his French fries and laugh at his terrible jokes. Today, their 40-year search would finally end. By 6:30 p.m., the Meridian Plaza had transformed from a bustling hive of corporate activity into a cathedral of silence. The last of the day shift employees filed out through the marble lobby, their conversations echoing off the vaulted ceilings before dissolving into the Seattle evening. Jonathan Hayes remained at his desk on the 45th floor, not because urgent business demanded it, but because the alternative, returning to his sterile penthouse apartment, held even less appeal than staying in his office. The Chun acquisition had closed successfully that afternoon, adding another $52 million to Hayes Technologies' quarterly revenue. The Microsoft partnership looked promising. The board had unanimously approved his proposal for expansion into artificial intelligence research. By every metric that mattered to Wall Street analysts and business journalists, October 23rd had been a triumph. So why did he feel like he was drowning in success? Jonathan finally surrendered to exhaustion at 8:15 p.m., his usual departure time. When no pressing meetings demanded otherwise, he gathered his files into the leather briefcase that had been a gift to himself when Hayes Technologies went public, a symbol of achievement that now felt more like a prop in a performance he couldn't stop giving. The elevator's descent from the 45th floor took exactly 90 seconds. Jonathan had timed it obsessively over the years, part of a rigid schedule that gave structure to a life that felt increasingly hollow. His routine was precise. Exit through the main lobby, nod to the security guard, walk 30 feet across the plaza to where Marcus, his driver, waited with the black Tesla Model S, and disappear into the tinted sanctuary that would transport him to another evening of solitude. But as Jonathan pushed through the heavy glass doors of Meridian Plaza, something shattered his carefully orchestrated routine. "Excuse me, sir. Can you spare some change?" The voice was soft, almost apologetic, but it carried a quality that made Jonathan's chest constrict with inexplicable recognition. He had heard thousands of similar requests over the years. Seattle's homeless population was impossible to ignore. And he donated generously to shelters and veterans organizations. But this voice was different. This voice reached through 40 years of carefully constructed emotional armor and found something he thought he'd lost forever. Jonathan turned toward the sound and saw her sitting against the concrete planter that bordered the building's entrance. A woman, perhaps in her late 40s, wrapped in a faded military jacket that bore the unmistakable wear patterns of someone who had lived in it through multiple seasons. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, fell in waves around a face that bore the weathered lines of someone who had endured more than her share of hardship. But it was her eyes that stopped Jonathan's world completely. They were green. Not just any green, but the exact shade of sea glass that haunted his childhood memories, the color of tide pools at Lincoln Beach, where the Hayes family had vacationed every summer before the accident. The same eyes that had looked up at him from hospital beds and foster home dormitories, wide with confusion and desperate trust, asking when they could go home together. The same eyes he'd been searching for in every crowd for 40 years. Sarah? The name escaped his lips as barely a whisper, lost in the symphony of evening traffic and distant construction sounds that formed Seattle's urban soundtrack. The woman's head snapped up sharply, her eyes widening with something far beyond surprise, a recognition so profound and painful it seemed to physically wound her. For a moment that stretched like eternity, brother and sister stared at each other across 4 decades of separation, their faces mirrors of disbelief, hope, and the kind of desperate recognition that transcends logic. "Johnny?" Her voice cracked. On the childhood nickname she hadn't spoken since she was 8 years old. "My God, Johnny, is that really you?" Jonathan's briefcase slipped from nerveless fingers, hitting the concrete with a sound that seemed to echo through his entire being. His legs, which had carried him confidently through high-stakes negotiations and marathon board meetings, suddenly felt unable to support his weight. He sank to his knees on the cold sidewalk, bringing himself to her level, his hands trembling. As they reached toward a face he'd memorized from a faded photograph, but had never stopped hoping to see again. "Sarah. Oh my God, Sarah, what happened to you? Where have you been?" Up close, Jonathan could see it all. The stubborn Hayes jawline they'd both inherited from their father. The small crescent-shaped scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd crashed her bicycle trying to keep up with him when she was 6. The way she still unconsciously bit her lower lip when overwhelmed by emotion. But he could also see what 4 decades had carved into her features. The hollowness in her cheeks that spoke of too many hungry nights. The premature lines etched by stress and exposure to the elements. The careful way she held her left shoulder that suggested old injuries never properly treated. "I knew it was you," Sarah said, tears streaming down weather-beaten cheeks as she reached out with trembling fingers to touch his face, as if confirming he wasn't another cruel dream. "I've been watching you for weeks, trying to work up the courage to approach. I saw your picture in the Seattle Times business section, and I thought I was losing my mind. My little brother, the one who used to read me bedtime stories and give me half his Halloween candy. You're the CEO of Hayes Technologies." "I never stopped looking for you," Jonathan said, his voice thick with 40 years of suppressed grief and desperate hope. "Never, not for a single day. I hired private investigators. I spent millions of dollars. I built this entire company partly hoping that somehow you'd see my name and find me. Where have you been? What happened after Spokane?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, tinged with decades of disappointment and survival instincts that had kept her alive on streets that showed no mercy. "What happened? Life happened, Johnny." "The foster family in Spokane," she paused, her jaw tightening. "Let's just say they weren't interested in damaged goods. When I aged out at 18, I had nothing. No education beyond high school, no job. Skills, no references, no family to fall back on." She gestured to her military jacket with something that might have been pride mixed with regret. "I joined the Army when I was 19. Figured it would give me structure, discipline, purpose. Maybe even help me track you down somehow through military networks. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, came back with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and PTSD that the VA system couldn't fix." Jonathan felt something fundamental breaking inside his chest, not just his heart, but the carefully constructed emotional fortress he'd built to survive his own losses. "I've been on the streets for 3 years, Sarah continued, her voice steady. "Despite the tears, the VA failed me just like the foster system did. But Johnny, look at you. Look at what you built. I'm so proud of you." The CEO of Hayes Technologies knelt on cold concrete beside his homeless veteran sister, both of them crying for everything they'd lost and everything they'd finally found. "You're coming home with me," Jonathan said, standing and extending his hand to Sarah. "Right now, tonight, no arguments." Sarah shook her head firmly, pulling back from his outstretched hand as if it might burn her. "Johnny, you don't understand. I'm not the little girl you remember who needed her big brother to chase away the monsters under the bed. I'm 48 years old, and I've been taking care of myself for 30 years. I don't need rescuing." The rejection hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He'd imagined this reunion countless times over the decades, in dreams, in quiet moments, in therapy sessions, but never once had he considered that Sarah might refuse his help. "But you're homeless, you're hungry. You asked me for change." "I asked for spare change, not charity," Sarah replied, her green eyes flashing with the same stubborn fire he remembered from childhood arguments. "There's a difference. I have my dignity, Johnny. It's about the only thing I have left, and I'm not giving it up, not even for you." Marcus, Jonathan's driver, approached cautiously from the Tesla, clearly confused by the scene of his usually composed boss kneeling on a sidewalk in his expensive suit. "Mr. Hayes, is everything all right, sir?" "Marcus, I'd like you to meet my sister, Sarah," Jonathan said, his voice still thick with emotion. "Sarah, this is Marcus Rodriguez. He's been with me for 5 years. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. In all his time working for Jonathan Hayes, he'd never heard mention of any family. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am," he said respectfully, recognizing something in Sarah's bearing that spoke of military service. Sarah studied Marcus for a moment, then nodded with the same respectful acknowledgement. "Army?" she asked. "Marine Corps. Ma'am, 2 tours in Iraq. Army, Afghanistan, 2 tours as well." The mutual recognition between veterans was immediate and profound. "Thank you for your service, Marine." "Thank you for yours, soldier." Jonathan watched this exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just pride talking. This was a warrior's code, earned through service and hardship that he, despite all his business battles, couldn't fully comprehend. "At least let me buy you dinner," Jonathan said carefully. "Not charity, just catching up, 40 years of catching up." Sarah hesitated, then glanced at Marcus, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "There's a diner 6 blocks from here," she said finally. "Mel's place. They know me there, treat me with respect. We can talk there." The walk to Mel's place was surreal for Jonathan. He'd driven past this neighborhood countless times in the back of his Tesla, but he'd never walked these streets, never seen them from eye level. Sarah moved with the confident stride of someone who knew every alley, every safe corner, every potential threat. This was her territory, and despite her circumstances, she commanded it with quiet authority. "You know everyone," Jonathan observed, as Sarah nodded to a shop owner closing up for the night, exchanged brief words with another homeless veteran sitting outside a convenience store, and checked on an elderly woman bundling newspapers. "Community isn't about having a house," Sarah explained. "It's about looking out for each other. These people have my back and I have theirs. That's worth more than you might think." Mel's diner was exactly what Jonathan expected: red vinyl, booths, checkered linoleum floors, and the kind of no-nonsense atmosphere that had fed working-class Seattle for decades. But what he didn't expect was the warm reception Sarah received. "Sarah, there's my favorite customer," called out Betty, a waitress who looked like she'd been serving coffee since the Kennedy administration. "Your usual table is open, honey. Thanks." "Betty, this is my brother, Johnny." Sarah slid into a corner booth with clear sight lines to both entrances, a habit, Jonathan realized, born from necessity. "Your brother?" Betty's eyes lit up. "Sarah, you never mentioned you had family. We've been out of touch," Sarah said diplomatically. Johnny, Betty here makes the best apple pie in Seattle. She's also the one who told me about the job opening at the warehouse last month. As Betty bustled away to get their coffee, Jonathan leaned forward. You're working? 3 days a week when they need extra hands loading trucks. It's not much, but it's honest work. Sarah's voice carried quiet pride. I don't take handouts, Johnny. I never have. Over the next 2 hours, as the diner slowly emptied and Betty refilled their coffee cups, Sarah told her story, not the abbreviated version she'd shared on the street, but the full, complicated truth of 4 decades lived without family. She told him about the foster family in Spokane who treated her like unpaid labor, about aging out of the system with nothing but a high school diploma and a determination to find her brother. She spoke of her Army years with genuine pride, the structure it gave her, the sense of purpose, the brothers and sisters in arms who became her chosen family. I was good at it, she said simply. Logistics and supply chain management. I could organize anything, move mountains of equipment, keep an entire base running smoothly. For the first time in my life, I felt valuable. The pain came when she talked about coming home. PTSD isn't like the movies, Johnny. It's not just flashbacks and nightmares. It's your brain rewiring itself to survive in a war zone, then trying to function in a world where people complain about slow internet, while you're remembering friends who died for their freedom to complain. I should have found you, Jonathan said, his voice heavy with guilt. I should have done more, tried harder. Stop, Sarah said firmly. We were children when they separated us. You were 12 years old. You think a 12-year-old could have fought the system that swallowed me up. You survived, Johnny. You thrived. You built something incredible. That's what I wanted for you. She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers calloused and scarred, his soft from years of office work. I used to imagine what you were doing, where you ended up. I hoped you found a family who loved you, that you went to college, that you became someone important. Finding out you're the CEO of Hayes Technologies, that you kept our family name? Johnny, you have no idea how proud that makes me. As they sat in that corner booth, Jonathan began to understand that rescuing Sarah wasn't going to be as simple as writing a check or offering her a room in his penthouse. This was a woman who had built her own life from nothing, who had earned every scrap of respect through blood, sweat, and service to her country. She didn't need saving, she needed understanding. I have an idea, Jonathan said carefully, but I want you to hear me out before you say no. Sarah smiled for the first time all evening, a real smile that reminded him suddenly of the gap-toothed 8-year-old who used to steal his French fries. I'm listening, big brother. But if this is some elaborate charity scheme, I'm walking out that door. It's not charity, Jonathan said, his mind already racing with possibilities. It's business. And I think you might be exactly what Hayes Technologies needs. Hayes Technologies is expanding our cloud infrastructure division. Jonathan began, choosing his words carefully as he watched Sarah's expression for any sign of the defensive walls going back up. We're moving massive amounts of server equipment, coordinating installations across 12 states, managing supply chains that would make the Pentagon jealous. And frankly, we're drowning in our own success. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips. And our current logistics coordinator just quit to take a job with Amazon. Left us high and dry with 3 major contracts hanging in the balance. I need someone who understands complex supply chains, someone who can organize chaos, someone who's managed operations under pressure. Jonathan leaned forward, someone with your military background. Johnny, I've been out of the Army for 6 years, and I've been homeless for 3 of those. No company is going to hire someone with my situation. Good thing I own the company then, Jonathan said with a slight smile. This isn't nepotism, Sarah. This is recognizing talent where others are too blind to see it. You organize supply. Lines in a war zone while people were shooting at you. Managing our Seattle warehouse should be a vacation by comparison. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for any hint of pity or charity disguised as opportunity. What exactly are you proposing? Full-time position as Regional Logistics Coordinator. Salary starts at $75,000 with performance bonuses, company healthcare, dental, vision. 2 weeks paid vacation to start, plus all federal holidays. Jonathan pulled out his phone and showed her the official job posting his HR department had published. These are the actual qualifications we're looking for. Tell me this doesn't describe you perfectly. Sarah read through the requirements. Military logistics experience preferred. Ability to work under pressure. Strong organizational and leadership. Skills, experience with complex supply chain management. Security clearance a plus. She looked up, and for the first time since their reunion, her expression held something other than wariness. You're serious about this? Dead serious. We have a problem. You have the skills to solve it. That's not charity, that's business. Jonathan signaled Betty for more coffee. But I won't lie to you. There are conditions. You'd need a permanent address for payroll and security purposes. You'd need professional clothing. And Sarah, you'd need to trust me enough to accept help getting back on your feet. The next morning, Sarah stood outside the employee entrance of the Hayes Technologies building, wearing a borrowed blazer from Betty, who, it turned out, had been saving professional clothes for exactly this kind of opportunity, and carrying a folder with her military records, recommendation letters from her commanding officers, and a resume she'd written on the back of a Mel's Diner placemat at 3 a.m. Marcus had picked her up from the YMCA, where she'd spent her first night indoors. In months after Jonathan quietly arranged for a temporary room. First days are always rough, Marcus had told her during the drive. But Mr. Hayes, Jonathan, he's good people. Doesn't make promises he can't keep. The security guard at the employee entrance looked skeptical until Sarah presented her temporary access badge. 40th floor, he said, pointing toward the elevators. Ask for Diana Chun in Human Resources. Diana Chun turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 30s who had clearly been briefed on Sarah's situation, but showed no trace of judgment. Military logistics? She asked, reviewing Sarah's folder. Afghanistan, 2 tours. Managed supply operations for Forward Operating Base Courage. Coordinated equipment and supply delivery for 12,000 personnel across the province. Diana's demeanor shifted immediately. My brother was Army, served at Phoebe Carriage in 2018. Jason Chen, with the 101st Airborne. Did you know him? Sarah's face lit up with genuine surprise. Sergeant Chun? Hell yes, I knew him. Good soldier. Is he doing well? Thanks to people like you keeping him supplied and fed, he made it home safe. He's a teacher now in Portland. Diana stood up and extended her hand. Welcome to Hayes Technologies, Sarah. Let me introduce you to your team. The Hayes Technologies warehouse complex was a monument to organizational efficiency, or at least it was supposed to be. When Sarah walked through the doors of the main facility with warehouse manager Tom Rodriguez, Marcus's cousin, she learned, what she saw was controlled chaos. We've got 3 major shipments delayed, inventory scattered across 4 different systems, and half our delivery truck sitting idle because nobody knows what's supposed to go where, Tom explained, running his hands through his hair in frustration. The previous coordinator quit without leaving any kind of transition notes. Sarah surveyed the scene with the trained eye of someone who had managed far worse situations under far more dangerous circumstances. How many personnel on the floor? 47 full-time, about 20 part-time. Inventory tracking system? 3 different ones that don't talk to each other. Delivery schedule? What delivery schedule? Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that had once reassured nervous soldiers before complex operations. Okay, Tom, here's what we're going to do. Within 2 weeks, Sarah had revolutionized the warehouse operation. She implemented a single unified inventory system, created color-coded organization zones, and established delivery schedules that actually made sense. More importantly, she had gained the respect of every worker on the floor. "She doesn't ask us to do anything she won't do herself," explained Maria Santos, a part-time employee who had been with the company for 3 years. First day, she was out there moving boxes, learning every position, understanding how the work actually gets done. Most managers sit in their office and send emails. Sarah gets her hands dirty. Jonathan watched from the observation deck as his sister conducted the morning briefing with the warehouse team. She had traded Betty's borrowed blazer for practical work clothes, but she stood with the bearing of someone who had found her element. This wasn't charity or nepotism. This was a professional doing what she did best. The changes Sarah implemented had effects far beyond the warehouse. Delivery times improved dramatically. Customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, and other departments began asking for her input on their logistics challenges. But more than that, Sarah was changing as a person. "She's got her own apartment now," Marcus reported to Jonathan one evening as they drove home from the office. "Nothing fancy, but it's hers. And she's been talking about taking some classes at the community college. Business management, maybe some computer programming." Jonathan felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine pride in family. Not the hollow satisfaction of business achievements, but the deep joy of watching someone he loved rediscover their purpose and potential. That evening, as he stood at his office window looking down at the street below, Jonathan realized he was no longer searching the faces in the crowd. For the first time in 40 years, he knew exactly where his sister was. And more importantly, he knew she was exactly where she belonged. "How's the new job treating you?" Jonathan asked Sarah as they shared dinner at Mel's Diner, a weekly tradition. They'd established. Sarah grinned, and in that expression, he could see both the confident woman she'd become and echoes of the fearless little girl who used to climb trees with him. "It's not just a job anymore, Johnny, it's a purpose. And for the first time since I left the Army, I feel like I'm building something that matters." "We're building something together," Jonathan corrected. Hayes Technologies was always missing something. Turns out it was a Hayes who understood that business is about people, not just profits. The initial success of Sarah's integration at Hayes Technologies had been remarkable, but it was what happened next that truly tested the strength of their rebuilt bond. As word of the company's transformation spread through industry circles, Jonathan began receiving calls from other CEOs asking about his miracle worker in logistics. What they didn't know was that Sarah had quietly been developing a vision that would challenge everything the corporate world believed about business. Success. "Johnny, I need to talk to you about something," Sarah said one evening as they shared their weekly dinner at Mel's Diner. Betty had long since made their corner booth a permanent reservation, and the framed photo of the Hayes siblings now hung proudly behind the cash register. "I've been thinking about all the veterans I served with, the ones who came home to nothing. Marcus knows dozens of them, good people who just need a chance. What if Hayes Technologies became more than a tech company? What if we became a bridge?" Jonathan listened as Sarah outlined her vision: a comprehensive veteran integration program that would transform Hayes Technologies into a model for corporate social responsibility. It wasn't just about hiring veterans, it was about creating support systems, providing training programs, offering mental health resources, and building a community where military skills translated into civilian success. "The board will never approve this," Jonathan said, though his eyes showed the same excitement that had driven him to build his empire. "Richard Blackwood thinks spending money on employee wellness programs is throwing profits out the window. Then we prove him wrong." Sarah replied with the same determination that had carried her through 2 combat tours. "We start small, we measure everything, and we show them that taking care of people isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business." Over the following months, Sarah began implementing her program with surgical precision. She partnered with Marcus to identify and recruit qualified veterans, working through established networks and VA resources. Each hire was carefully documented, their skills, their progress, their impact on company operations. The first veteran Sarah hired was Danny Thompson, a former Army mechanic struggling with PTSD who had been living in his car. Within 3 months, Danny had revolutionized the warehouse's equipment maintenance protocols, reducing downtime by 40% and saving the company hundreds of thousands in repair costs. "Every veteran has a story," Sarah explained to Jonathan as they reviewed the quarterly reports. Danny's mechanical expertise came from keeping Humvees running in combat zones. Maria Santos, our new quality control specialist, learned attention to detail diffusing IEDs. These aren't charity cases. They're untapped assets that other companies are too narrow-minded to recognize. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was steady and profound. Sarah instituted morning briefings that borrowed from military tradition but adapted for civilian workplace dynamics. She created mentorship programs pairing veteran employees with civilian staff, fostering understanding and breaking down stereotypes on both sides. At first, some of the long-term employees were skeptical, admitted Tom Rodriguez, who had become Sarah's strongest ally in the warehouse. They thought the veterans would be rigid, unapproachable. But what they discovered was that military training creates people who understand teamwork, responsibility, and getting the job done right the first time. The numbers supported the cultural shift. Employee satisfaction scores climbed month after month. Customer complaints dropped to near zero as the precision and dedication of veteran employees influenced entire departments. Most surprisingly, innovation flourished as military problem-solving approaches merged with civilian creativity. The real test came during Hayes Technologies' annual board review. Richard Blackwood and the other directors had noticed the changes, both the improved performance metrics and the increased spending on non-essential employee programs. "Jonathan, your sister's initiatives are admirable," Blackwood said during a private meeting, "but we're concerned about the long-term financial implications. These support programs, the additional training costs, the expanded benefits packages, they're eating into profit margins. They're investments in human capital." Jonathan replied, armed with Sarah's meticulously gathered data. "Our veteran employees have the lowest turnover rate in company history, the highest productivity scores, and the strongest customer satisfaction ratings. We're not spending money. We're making money by doing the right thing." 18 months after Sarah's first day at Hayes Technologies, the company received an unexpected call from the Department of Defense. They wanted to study Hayes Technologies as a model for veteran transition programs, potentially recommending their approach to other corporations across the nation. "Ms. Hayes," said Colonel Patricia Williams during her site visit, "what you've built here is unprecedented. You've created a system that honors military service while maximizing civilian potential. This isn't just good business, it's good for America." The validation came from other sources as well. Harvard Business School requested permission to write a case study on the Hayes model. Forbes featured Sarah on their cover with the headline, "The Veteran Who's Revolutionizing Corporate Culture." Stock prices reached all-time highs as investors recognized that companies with strong social responsibility programs consistently outperformed their competitors. 2 years after their reunion outside Meridian Plaza, Jonathan and Sarah stood together in the conference room where they'd first discussed her unconventional hiring. The walls now displayed certificates of appreciation from veteran organizations, photographs of employee success stories, and metrics that told the story of a company transformed. "Remember when you asked if I could spare some change? Jonathan, said, looking out at the bustling warehouse floor where veteran and civilian employees worked side by side. Sarah smiled, her hand resting on the bronze star that now hung in a place of honor next to Jonathan's business awards. I was asking for coins. You gave me a kingdom. We built a kingdom, Jonathan corrected. And we built it the right way, by understanding that the greatest wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you create when you refuse to leave anyone behind. The CEO, who had spent 40 years searching for family, had discovered that family wasn't just about blood. It was about building a community where everyone had value, everyone had purpose, and everyone had the chance to serve something greater than themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.